the HOA tyrant and his reign of fear. In the heart of Maplewood Estates, a seemingly picturesque suburban neighborhood, homeowners lived under the iron-fisted rule of their HOA president, Richard Thornton. At first glance, Richard appeared to be a model leader, polished, articulate, and deeply involved in community affairs. But those who lived under his authority knew the truth. He was a dictator in disguise, a man who wielded his power not to maintain order, but to instill fear and obedience. From the moment he was elected, Richard tightened his grip on the neighborhood, introducing a barrage of strict regulations. Fines were handed out like candy: $2.50 for leaving a trash can out an hour too long, $500 for planting flowers that weren't on the HOA's approved list, and even $1,000 for parking in one's own driveway overnight. No rule was too trivial, no punishment too harsh. Homeowners whispered behind closed doors, exchanging stories of Richard's ruthlessness. He had a way of making people feel helpless, ensuring that any attempt to oppose him was swiftly crushed. Some who dared to question his authority suddenly found themselves facing unexpected rule violations, their appeals mysteriously lost in paperwork. Others who had spoken up at meetings had their voices drowned out by Richard's carefully curated supporters, people who either feared him or benefited from his rule. But there was something even darker lurking beneath his tyrannical leadership. While the residents of Maplewood Estates struggled under the weight of excessive fines and mysterious HOA fees, Richard's lavish lifestyle began to raise suspicion. Despite his modest HOA salary, he drove a brand-new luxury SUV, dined at high-end restaurants, and was frequently spotted on weekend getaways at exclusive resorts. At first, homeowners chalked it up to personal wealth, assuming he must have other sources of income. But one resident, Mark Ellison, wasn't convinced. Mark had lived in Maplewood Estates for nearly a decade and had seen 3 different HOA presidents come and go. None had ever displayed the kind of unchecked financial power Richard seemed to possess. Something wasn't adding up. The final straw came when Mark received a fine for a violation he hadn't committed, a $700 penalty for excessive noise when he had been out of town for an entire week. Furious, he decided to dig deeper, unaware that his investigation would lead to a shocking revelation, one that would bring the mighty Richard Thornton crashing down. Mark Ellison had never been the type to accept injustice quietly. As an ex-financial auditor, he had a keen eye for suspicious transactions and inconsistencies in records. When he received the bogus fine for excessive noise, despite being out of town, something inside him snapped. He had tolerated the absurd rules and unfair penalties for too long. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone in Maplewood Estates who had suffered under Richard Thornton's rule. Determined to expose the truth, Mark requested financial statements from the HOA under the Homeowners Association Transparency Act, a law that required HOA boards to disclose financial records upon request. However, Richard was one step ahead. The HOA office conveniently lost the records, citing clerical errors and system failures that prevented them from providing access. But Mark wasn't easily discouraged. He reached out to other homeowners, asking if they had noticed any unusual charges on their statements. What he discovered was shocking. Several residents had been billed for services that never existed. There were charges for landscaping maintenance on empty lots, security patrols no one had ever seen, and mysterious administrative fees that changed every few months. Realizing he needed solid evidence, Mark turned to his old skills. He discreetly attended HOA meetings, taking notes on how Richard deflected questions about budget allocations. He pored over public tax records, discovering that Richard had recently purchased a second home in Florida, paid in full. The puzzle pieces were coming together. Richard was embezzling HOA funds, funneling money through fake invoices and fraudulent maintenance costs. The deeper Mark dug, the clearer the pattern became. Over the past 3 years, Richard had siphoned off over $50,000, and that was just what Mark could trace from surface-level records. Who knew how much more had been buried under forged documents and shell companies? But exposing a fraud like Richard Thornton was no small feat. He was smart, ruthless, and had connections. If Mark made one wrong move, Richard could cover his tracks, frame him, or worse, find a way to get rid of him. Realizing he couldn't do this alone, Mark contacted a local investigative journalist, someone with experience uncovering HOA corruption. Together, they devised a plan to gather undeniable proof, the kind that would force the authorities to act. What Mark didn't realize was that his investigation had not gone unnoticed. Someone had tipped off Richard, and he was about to strike back before Mark could expose him. Mark knew he was on to something big, but what he didn't realize was that Richard Thornton wasn't the type to go down without a fight. The HOA president had spent years building his empire of corruption, and he had too much to lose if someone like Mark uncovered the truth. The first sign that Mark had been noticed came in the form of a letter, an official-looking document from the HOA, stamped and signed. The letter accused Mark of multiple violations: unauthorized modifications to his property, which he had never made; failure to comply with HOA landscaping guidelines, despite his lawn being immaculate; hostile conduct towards HOA board members for simply asking for financial records. Each violation came with a hefty fine totaling $5,000, an outrageous sum that seemed designed to break him financially. But Mark wasn't intimidated. He knew exactly what was happening. Richard was trying to shut him up, hoping he would back off before uncovering more evidence. Then the harassment escalated. Mark's trash bins mysteriously disappeared, forcing him to pay extra to get new ones. His mailbox was vandalized with a threatening note that read, "Stay out of HOA business." An anonymous complaint was filed against him, claiming his dog was aggressive, even though Mark didn't own a dog. Richard was using every dirty trick in the book to make Mark's life miserable. But what really made Mark realize how dangerous this had become was the late-night encounter. One evening, as Mark was coming home, he noticed a black SUV idling near his driveway. The windows were tinted, and the headlights dimmed. It just sat there unmoving. When he walked towards his house, the SUV suddenly sped off, disappearing into the night. Someone was watching him. Mark knew this had gone beyond just petty fines and intimidation. Richard was scared, and a man like him, backed into a corner, could be unpredictable. Mark needed to act fast, but he also needed to be smart. He documented everything: the fake violations, the vandalism, the mysterious SUV. He made copies of all the evidence he had gathered and stored them in multiple places, including with his journalist contact. But Richard was about to make a fatal mistake, one that would expose his corruption for good. Mark knew time was running out. Richard Thornton was growing desperate, and desperate men made reckless mistakes. Instead of backing down, Mark decided to go all in. With the journalist's help, he compiled a detailed report of Richard's financial crimes, fake invoices, missing HOA funds, and suspicious real estate purchases. But having proof wasn't enough. He needed the right people to see it. The perfect opportunity came during the annual HOA meeting, where Richard would stand before the community, boasting about his achievements. It was the one place where all the homeowners would be gathered, and Mark planned to expose him publicly, with no way for him to escape. On the night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Dozens of frustrated homeowners sat in their chairs, waiting for the usual boring speech. Richard stood at the podium, wearing his signature arrogant smirk, oblivious to what was about to unfold. Then Mark stood up. "Before we continue, I have something important to share." His voice was calm but firm, echoing through the hall. Richard's face darkened, but before he could interrupt, Mark held up a thick folder. Copies of financial records, fraudulent transactions, and proof of embezzlement. The journalist had also leaked parts of the report online, ensuring that even if Richard tried to silence him, the truth was already out there. Whispers turned into gasps as Mark read out the evidence. Over the past 3 years, more than $50,000 in HOA funds has disappeared into personal accounts, fake invoices, and luxury expenses, all traced back to one person, Richard Thornton. The room erupted. Homeowners who had once been too scared to speak demanded answers, shouting accusations. Richard tried to deny everything, but it was too late. Then the police walked in. Mark had sent the evidence to the local authorities earlier that day. With so much damning proof, the police had obtained a warrant for Richard's arrest. As the officers moved towards him, Richard's confidence shattered. He stammered, tried to argue, but the handcuffs snapped around his wrists before he could say another word. The crowd cheered. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free from his grip. People patted Mark on the back, thanking him for standing up when no one else dared. Richard was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of HOA funds. He faced serious prison time, and the homeowners began rebuilding their community, this time without corruption. As Mark walked out of the meeting, he saw the same black SUV parked across the street. But this time, it wasn't watching him, it was watching Richard being taken away in a police car. Justice had been served. The reign of the HOA tyrant was over.